The lights were never supposed to stay on that late. In Hollywood, productions shut down with precision, power down, lock the doors, move on to the next illusion. But that night, deep behind a forgotten soundstage on the east side of Los Angeles, a red emergency light kept blinking, slow, deliberate, almost like a heartbeat. No alarm sounded, no one ran, yet doors were being locked, one by one. At the exact same moment, millions of people around the world pressed play on a new Netflix series called Stranger Things. Kids on bicycles, a missing child, a government lab hidden in plain sight. Most viewers leaned back and smiled. In Hollywood, a few people stood up, because they had seen those corridors before. The year was 1984. On paper, the building was a film set, rented warehouse space used for low-budget science fiction movies. The kind no one remembered, the kind that never won awards. During the day, it looked ordinary. Cables on the floor, half-built walls, crew members smoking by the loading bay. But some nights, the set lights never turned off. A junior technician worked those nights. His name never appeared in credits, and years later he would insist it stay that way. His job was simple: check the generators, monitor power levels, and make sure no one entered restricted areas until morning. At 2:17 a.m., he noticed something wrong. A door was open. It wasn't supposed to exist. According to the floor plan taped to the wall, that hallway ended in concrete. No access, no room, just solid structure. But there it was, metal frame, industrial hinges, a faint white light spilling onto the floor. He hesitated. Then curiosity won. He stepped inside. Years later, when he finally spoke, his voice always slowed at this part. That wasn't a film set, he said. That was a waiting room. The walls were too thick, not for soundproofing, thicker, functional. The air felt colder, heavier. Along one side of the room were small chairs bolted to the floor, child-sized. Across from them stood metal lockers, each marked with numbers instead of names. At the far end, a reinforced glass window looked into another room. The lights in that room were fully on. Behind the glass stood a child. The boy wasn't crying. He wasn't screaming. He was standing perfectly still, staring at the wall in front of him, and the wall was moving. Not visibly, not like a door or a screen. It pulsed, subtle, as if something behind it was breathing. The technician took a step back. That's when the hand touched his shoulder. "Wrong door," a voice said calmly. He never saw the man approach. No footsteps, no warning, just a hand, firm but not aggressive. The man wore no uniform, no badge, only a plain jacket, and a look that said this conversation would not continue. The technician nodded. The door closed. By morning, the hallway was gone. For decades, that night stayed buried. Not because no one talked, but because no one listened. Hollywood is full of strange stories, and this one sounded like just another. Until 2016. Until a series about missing children and secret laboratories became a global obsession. The technician watched the first episode alone. By the end of the second scene, he turned the TV off. His hands were shaking. He reached for his phone and dialed a number he hadn't called in over 20 years. That phone rang 6 times that week. Former producers, ex-set managers, men officially credited as location consultants who had never scouted locations. They all asked the same question: who talked? No one had an answer, because the creators of Stranger Things had never worked in those buildings, at least not according to any public record. 3 weeks after the series premiered, quiet changes began across Hollywood. 2 old soundstages were shut down for structural renovations. Several 1980s film reels were reclassified as damaged and removed from archives. A university media library reported that a box of analog tapes, unchecked for decades, had gone missing overnight. No headlines followed. But inside the industry, the message was clear. This wasn't maintenance. It was cleanup. A young journalist noticed the pattern. She had started with a harmless article, how Stranger Things revived 80s nostalgia. But the deeper she looked, the stranger it became. Old studio maps didn't match current layouts. Production credits listed departments that no longer existed. Some names appeared once, then vanished entirely. When she requested access to a closed archive, she received a call instead. A polite voice, a simple warning. Some stories don't benefit from being reopened. She didn't publish the article, but she didn't stop digging either, because one detail refused to disappear. In every version of the story, every rumor, every half-whispered memory, there was always a room, always a child, and always a wall. That wasn't just a wall, and the people who remembered it all agreed on one thing. What the world watched on screen in 2016 was not born in fiction. It was remembered. The first rule in Hollywood was simple. If something truly mattered, it never made noise. No press releases, no lawsuits, no public denials. It simply disappeared. The journalist learned that rule the hard way. Her name didn't matter anymore. Not after the second warning. She had followed the trail quietly at first. Old permits, archived floor plans, defunct production companies that had existed for less than a year and vanished without debt, without scandal. That alone was unusual. Then she noticed the pattern. Every closed studio, every renovated soundstage, every missing reel, they all traced back to the same narrow window of time, 1982 to 1986, and every location shared one thing in common, a secondary level that did not appear on any official blueprint. She found the first confirmation buried inside a county records office, a fire safety inspection report from 1985. Most of the document was routine, exit signs, extinguisher placement, emergency lighting, but one line stood out. A handwritten note in the margin, barely legible, lower access area sealed, federal override, no agency name, no signature, just the word federal. When Stranger Things became a global phenomenon, that same word began circulating again, quietly, among people who had once worked those sets, not spoken out loud, texted, whispered, implied. A former assistant director remembered being told never to enter a certain corridor, even during active shoots. A lighting technician recalled being ordered to keep generators running overnight, despite no scheduled filming. And a location manager, now retired, finally admitted something else. They weren't sets, he said. They were covers. The journalist arranged her first off-record meeting in a diner off the 405. Neutral ground, bright lights, too public for threats. The man who showed up looked ordinary, mid-60s, baseball cap, calloused hands. He ordered coffee and didn't touch it. They use the industry because no one questions it, he said without introduction. Trucks come and go. People work late. Screams don't mean anything on a soundstage. She asked about the children. His jaw tightened. They called them assets, he replied. Temporary placements. No last names. No paper trails. She asked where they came from. The man shook his head. Runaways, foster system transfers, kids who wouldn't be missed quickly. He leaned forward, and some who were. That same night, the journalist's apartment door was open when she returned home. Nothing was stolen, nothing was broken, but her notes were gone. Not the laptop, not the recorder, only the handwritten pages. On the kitchen counter sat a single manila folder. Inside, photocopies of her own research, with one page added on top, a studio map, highlighted in red, and written beneath it, in clean block letters, "Stop here." She didn't, because once you understand how the machine works, fear becomes secondary to clarity. The children weren't experiments in the way movies imagine them. No monsters, no cinematic breakthroughs. What they tested was endurance, isolation, sensory deprivation, stress thresholds. They wanted to know how much pressure a developing mind could absorb before breaking or changing. One internal memo, recovered from a private collection, spelled it out clearly. Psychological response under sustained environmental distortion. No explanation of what distortion meant, but witnesses remembered the walls. Always the walls. Rooms designed to feel wrong. Angles slightly off. Low-frequency vibrations that never stopped. One former security contractor described it perfectly. It was like the building wanted something from you. As the journalist pieced it together, another truth surfaced. These programs didn't end. They migrated. When one studio closed, another opened. When one name burned, a new company formed. And when the series brought too much attention, the response was immediate. Shut it down. Erase the overlaps. Discredit anyone who connected the dots. Which explained the sudden closures, the missing tapes, the calls no one admitted making. The final confirmation came from an unlikely source. A retired sound engineer living in Arizona. He agreed to talk only once, only on tape. They weren't looking for powers, he said. That's what people get wrong. He paused. They were looking for doors. She asked what kind. His answer was quiet. The kind that opens when you push the mind far enough. 2 days after recording the interview, the engineer changed his phone number. A week later, he moved. The tape arrived in the journalist's mailbox anyway. No return address. Just a sticky note attached. They're watching who remembers. By the end of the month, Hollywood had done what it always did best. It smiled. Award shows continued. New productions filled the lots. The past stayed buried under premieres and applause. But something had shifted. Too many people had recognized too much. And somewhere beneath the city, behind sealed doors and forgotten corridors, the walls were still standing, waiting. The silence wasn't accidental. That was the final conclusion the journalist reached. Hollywood didn't bury stories because they were false. It buried them because they were incomplete. And incomplete truths were dangerous. The deeper she went, the clearer the structure became. There was no single program, no official name, no master document. What existed instead was a network of permissions, temporary, deniable, and compartmentalized. Each group knew only enough to do its job. Each believed someone else was responsible for oversight. Classic containment. And it worked, for decades. The last intact file she uncovered wasn't found in a studio archive or a government database. It came from a private estate sale in Malibu. A box labeled Production Notes, 19. Inside were contracts, call sheets, budget overviews, and one internal memo stamped restricted. The memo wasn't long. It didn't need to be. Continuation requires minimal exposure. Entertainment infrastructure remains optimal for concealment. Emotional disruption is not a byproduct. It is a variable. She She read it twice, then a third time. They hadn't hidden the work behind film production. They had used film production to justify it. That explained everything. Why soundstages were ideal. Why night shoots were common. Why no one questioned screaming, alarms, or reinforced rooms. Hollywood was the perfect mask, a place where nothing was real. So no one expected the real to exist. The final interview came from someone who had never worked in film, a former clinical consultant. He agreed to meet only after weeks of hesitation, only after she promised not to use his name, his voice, or his likeness. They met in a rented office with no windows. He brought nothing with him. They weren't trying to create anything extraordinary, he said. That's the lie people want to believe. Monsters, abilities, superhuman results. She asked what they were trying to do. He leaned back. They wanted to understand thresholds of fear, thresholds of isolation, thresholds of reality. At a certain point, he continued, the mind stops resisting and starts adapting. Perception changes. Time feels different. Space feels unstable. She asked about the walls. He nodded slowly. Controlled environments, sensory distortion, subsonic frequencies, visual repetition. Then he added something she hadn't expected. The children weren't failures. Her pen froze. They were proof. According to him, the program ended publicly in the late 80s. Funding shifted. Oversight tightened. Officially, the work was deemed non-viable. But the data didn't disappear. It was archived, reclassified, and eventually absorbed into other research under different names. What survived wasn't the facilities. It was the understanding. When Stranger Things exploded into global culture, it didn't expose the truth. It activated recognition. People who had been told for decades that what they saw wasn't real suddenly watched it unfold on screen, scene by scene, emotion by emotion. And memory does not ask permission before returning. That was the mistake, not the show. The timing. 2 weeks after the journalist finalized her manuscript, she received an email with no sender, no subject line, just an attachment. A scanned page from an internal studio directory. One department name was circled in red. Environmental continuity. She searched it. Nothing came up. No listings, no records, no explanation. But beneath the circled text, someone had typed a message. You're asking the right questions, but too late. The story was never published. Not because she was threatened, not because she was paid, but because every outlet she contacted responded the same way, politely, professionally, and with identical wording. After review, we've decided not to move forward. No edits requested, no objections raised, just silence. Today the buildings still exist, renovated, rebranded, relit. Tour groups walk past them without knowing what once stood behind those walls. New productions fill the schedules, new stories are told, but the layouts never fully changed. Some corridors still end too abruptly. Some rooms remain sealed for no clear reason. Some basements are listed as structurally inaccessible, and people who worked there long enough still avoid certain doors. Not because they believe something is inside, but because they remember when something was. Hollywood survived by convincing the world that everything is fiction, but occasionally fiction survives long enough to remind people otherwise. And when it does, the response is always the same. Lock it down, erase the trail, let the lights distract them, because the most dangerous thing isn't what was done, it's who might remember how it felt.